Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Bruce Sports. I'm Ian DeMars alongside co host Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, we had a very interesting weekend this past weekend where we saw the Alliance of American Football finally get started. What is supposed to be labeled the developmental league for the NFL, but we also saw some pretty exciting things happen in the NFL as well.
Yeah, it was kind of actually a big week for football in general with the combination of the AAF and some things that were pretty interesting and kind of controversial happening in pro football this week.
Yeah, so let's start off with the big news that actually happened earlier today, and it was that the Baltimore Ravens are actually in agreement with the Denver Broncos to trade Joe Flacco to Denver. Now, the trade cannot become official until the new league year begins on March 13th, but the terms have been agreed. It's looking like it's going to be Joe Flacco going to Denver for supposed to be a middle round pick going to Baltimore. What are your initial thoughts on this move?
Kind of crazy that Joe Flacco, quarterback that won the Super Bowl and was a Super Bowl MVP, is being traded to a team for a mid-round pick. But that's kind of where we're at now with Flacco, is he has never been able to reproduce the stats that he was able to put up in those years when he was taking the Ravens deep into the playoffs, and just hasn't been able to recapture the magic that he had leading that team to victories. He's been pretty lackluster ever since he got that big deal. And in reality, this makes sense for both teams. The Broncos desperately need a quarterback that can actually get things done, and they're counting on Joe Flacco to still be one of those guys, whereas the Ravens want to move forward with Lamar Jackson. I don't think Lamar Jackson is necessarily going to be the answer to the future, but it's clear by what they did this season that Joe Flacco is also not the answer to the future. So they have to try to move forward, and you might as well get something for it. The only thing about it is you might not always want to trade in your conference, because if they do make the playoffs again, they could very well see Flacco down the road, which it would be sort of an awkward game.
Yeah, when I looked at it, I thought, honestly, I'll be honest with you, I kind of love the move. I think it works out for both teams. You look at Baltimore, I mean, obviously they were winning games last year with Lamar Jackson. They were able to reestablish the run game more. The passing game is still something that needs to be worked on, but they were winning games and they got to the playoffs. So definitely something that shows signs that Jackson might possibly be your future quarterback. Not sure if he's going to be a quarterback for 10 years, but at least for the next few years, you can rely on Lamar Jackson, and you do get a pick in return, which is always helpful. And you look at Denver. This situation reminds me a little bit of what happened when Peyton Manning went to Denver. Now, Peyton Manning ended up signing with Denver, but it was towards the tail end of his career. He had won a Super Bowl, obviously was one of the best quarterbacks in the league at the time, but needed to kind of move on. Things were happening in Indianapolis and just needed to change the scenery. That's exactly what Joe Flacco needed. Joe Flacco was playing very well last year before an injury happened. Team started to falter a little bit when he was playing a few weeks injured, and then obviously they were playing a lot better without him. So he needed a change of scenery, and I think that Denver is actually a fit that a lot of us weren't really thinking of, but makes sense. Case Keenum didn't necessarily have that good of a season. The Broncos haven't been in the playoffs for a couple years now, and you look at the options they had. They could have went after a different free agent quarterback, or they could have drafted a quarterback as well. But you look at, they have the 10th, I believe it's the 10th pick in the draft, and it's not looking like they're going to get Dwayne Haskins, who it looks to be the clear-cut number one quarterback. Some debate about Kyler Murray as well, maybe a little bit of Drew Lock. But in this case, now what you can do with that pick is a couple of things. You can either go defensive with that pick, you can maybe go after someone else on the offensive side of the ball, or you can possibly trade down in the draft, maybe trade with the team that is looking for a quarterback, get a couple more picks, and then if you want to maybe go for a quarterback later on in the draft, you can. Joe Flacco's not the long-term answer in Denver. He's the short-term answer. Could be the guy for the next year or two. Case Keenum, I believe his contract for next year, only part of the money is guaranteed. So even if you want to cut him, you're not fully losing out on all the money that he signed for. It's a good move, I think, for both sides of the ball, and I think that both teams are better from it.
I feel like Denver, ever since Peyton Manning, though, and even sort of to a degree with Peyton Manning, was trying to patch a hole at quarterback. Like, it's been so long since they had a franchise guy. Like, you knew Peyton Manning was toward the tail end of his career, and even though he did win a Super Bowl, it was kind of only that short-term solution. I think they need to go get somebody who's actually potentially going to be the long-term, and I would go for one of the guys that's maybe not one of the top 2 quarterbacks in this draft, but maybe somebody who you can develop. They haven't really had good luck at the quarterback position. And if it is true that Joe Flacco is their short-term solution, again, they need to start finding a way to bridge that gap, because they can't just continuously bring in quarterbacks that are aging toward the end of their career. Eventually, they're just not going to be able to keep that up anymore.
Yeah, well, with Joe Flacco, depending on how long he is with the team, do you think that they'll make the playoffs with him there at any point?
I think they will make the playoffs with him there. I think they'll make the playoffs. I was going to say next year, but then I remember that there's still the Chargers and the Chiefs in that division, so that's a rough go of it. I think they still could make the playoffs next year, though. I think they'll make the playoffs with Joe Flacco.
Okay. Yeah, looking at it, obviously it's not as big of – we were talking about comparing it to Peyton Manning. Obviously, it's not as comparable because obviously Peyton Manning is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But Joe Flacco, when he gets to the playoffs, he steps his game up to a whole nother level. So if he can somehow get this team to the playoffs, even if it's a wild card, yeah, they're playing in a tough division, but if he can get them to the playoffs, watch out because this guy can.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like whenever he gets into the playoffs, he takes the team far. And that was always the thing with him, is if he didn't make the playoffs, or like it would just be you had to get into the playoffs with Joe Flacco. That was the challenge. If you could get in the playoffs with Joe Flacco, you were good to go. But otherwise, he just had too many seasons where he just did not produce there. But moving forward to another trade story in the NFL, it has become official that Antonio Brown is requesting a trade from the Pittsburgh Steelers, citing that he was tired of basically being everybody's punching bag as the reason why the Steelers had turmoil in their locker room. What are your thoughts on this? What are some possible landing destinations? What makes sense? How did this relationship go so bad so fast?
I mean, looking at Antonio Brown, obviously you can tell he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. I'm not saying he's the best. I'm not sure where you could even rank him. I have him as a top 5, but there are some things that kind of cause him to only be a top 5 and not like a top 3 or even a top or even the best. He's had off the field issues before. Most recently, he had a speeding ticket before a Thursday night game this year where he was accused of going 100 miles per hour. And what happened this week? He didn't show up for his court hearing. So basically, he forfeited his opportunity to make a case out of this and ends up having to do whatever has to happen. Could possibly leave team a suspension. Who knows? He's had issues on the field. We've seen some of his tantrums on the sidelines. We've seen him react negatively on the field. And we've seen him react negatively in the locker room as well. And a lot of this is hurting his case to being the best receiver in the league. This is why he is only in the top 5. Some people, because of these issues, could even make him all the way only top 10 receiver. But there is a lot of upside. There is some upside from him. So obviously this guy puts up numbers on the field. He's a different guy when he's on the field. He is a home run threat when this guy's on the field, when he's on the field. And he can be a dynamic player in the return game as well. We've seen him dominate punt returns in the past. So whoever is going after this guy, if you're willing to risk some of the issues that he has on and off the field for his play on the field, then you have to take those opportunities. But it's just a matter of what are they going to get for him, because there's reports that they're going to be looking for a first-round pick. But like I said, all these issues caused him to lessen his value a little bit. He might only be worth a second, maybe a third-round pick. But, I mean, I think a team that has to go after him has to be the San Francisco 49ers. Reason being, he's mentioned, not really mentioned, but he's tweeted stuff before, and it makes it seem like he wants to go to San Francisco. There's been players from San Francisco that have tweeted at him. The tight end Kittle has tweeted at him saying, hey, come here, basically. And you look at that team, Jimmy Garoppolo, who has played well when he's healthy, could be huge for them. They have the cap space to sign him to a long-term deal, and you have an offensive-minded head coach in Kyle Shanahan. And that team desperately needs a number one wide receiver. Kittle's a great number one option, but you need someone that can play with him. You need someone that can take the double teams off of Kittle. And you put Brown on that team, and that becomes a matchup nightmare for anyone playing him. So I think that's where he should go. I think where he will end up going, though, could be the New York Jets. Now, the reason I say this is because the Jets have a ton of cap room. And, it's in the division, but I think I'd be more worried about trading him to the 49ers, where you put him on that team, when healthy, can be a possible playoff team. Instead, trade him to a team in the AFC where they're going up against the Patriots with Tom Brady for at least a couple more years, so that they're not going to be in the playoffs, so probably not the next couple of years. And besides, there are some tough divisions out there, as we mentioned the AFC West earlier. So I think they will end up probably trading him to the Jets. They'll get some good compensation for him. The Jets are going to sign him to a long-term deal. Brown might not like it, but you want what? He'll be in New York. He'll be playing in the same stadium as Odell Beckham Jr. They might get to play each other. That'd be one crazy matchup. Just put him in New York. I'm sure he'll love that spotlight.
That sort of reminds me of when the Packers traded Brett Favre to the Jets instead of sending him to the Vikings. I know that the 49ers do want Antonio Brown. There was actually that image that surfaced of Antonio Brown with the photoshopped 49ers jersey on. So the thing about Antonio Brown is we've seen this with receivers before, and we've brought it up before, where players like Terrell Owens or players like Chad Johnson, these outspoken receivers that definitely have some sort of talent, but also sort of can be a distraction, don't necessarily seem to push a team over the edge from contender to Super Bowl champion. So we saw Terrell Owens is probably the best example of someone that almost got a Super Bowl championship. Possibly Randy Moss would be another. But these players make their team better in the short run, but then eventually they have a negative impact on their team and in the locker room, as you sort of saw with the Steelers. So if I was an NFL team, I wouldn't necessarily be jumping at the chance to claim Antonio Brown. I don't think there's a lot of teams out there that are maybe one receiver away from being really, really good. In terms of places where he's going to go, I could definitely see him going to the 49ers. I think it really depends who's willing to offer the most to the Steelers. How about this for a crazy idea, though? Jerry Jones turned the team around with Amari Cooper. What if he wants another number one receiver and trades for Antonio Brown with the Steelers to bring Antonio Brown and Amari Cooper to the same team?
That would actually be a very intriguing move. There is one issue with that, because if the Steelers are looking for a first-round pick and they want it this year, they can't do that. The Cowboys wouldn't be able to do that because that's what they gave up for Amari Cooper. Now, if somehow they can maybe trade away a player or maybe some sort of draft pick, then yeah, that could really work out. The draft pick, that could really work out. But if they're specifically demanding a number one, at least a first-round pick and something else, then Dallas won't be able to do that, which is kind of tough. But a team that could actually afford that, based off of some trades that they've done recently, how about the Green Bay Packers? They have 2 first-round picks this year. You could give up one of those, maybe a couple other picks, and you could put Antonio Brown there with Devontae Adams. That would be a pretty intense combo with Aaron Rodgers as well.
That's true, and the Packers would have no excuse why their offense is sputtering anymore if that's the case, because now they have a decent running game. They have one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history, and then bring in Antonio Brown with a rising star and Devontae Adams. I don't know if the Packers are bold enough to pull the trigger on that. I know that their GM, Brian Gutekunst, has said that he wants to be more active in free agency, but they have been a team that traditionally clings to their first-round picks and tries to generate picks rather than giving away those picks for players. So we will have to see if that's the way that they keep going with this. But we had another interesting bit of news that happened in the NFL, and that's that Kareem Hunt has found a new NFL home. That is with the Cleveland Browns. Your thoughts, Ian? Is this a good move for Cleveland, bad move for Cleveland?
Well, when I first saw the news, I thought of a few different things. First off was, well, this is something Cleveland would do. And you look at, well, he technically played college in Toledo, Ohio, so he basically stays home. It's not really a lose move for the Browns. You might say it's a lose move because obviously the things that have happened with Kareem Hunt. But here's what happens. He's currently suspended, has to be reinstated, or who knows what will happen in regards to this case. Obviously, the NFL is still looking into it. They're not even close to being done with this. So it could be quite some time before we actually know the ruling on Kareem Hunt. You look at, let's say, for example, let's say he gets suspended a year and they still have him after that time. You look at that combo backfield of him and Nick Chubb, that's a dynamic backfield for the future, depending on what happens. Kareem Hunt, when he did play, was a special talent. Obviously, the domestic issues off the field have hurt his reputation. But if he gets suspended, gets fined, serves all that, gets reinstated, comes back, this Cleveland team can be a very dangerous threat. But then I started thinking of another outcome. And I know we're going to be talking about it a little bit later. But the fact that he did domestic violence and got signed within the same year, and yet Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem, and yet obviously they're not the same kind of talent. But Colin Kaepernick could still be at least a viable backup in this league. He hasn't been signed. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But this just questions me how teams can forgive players for domestic violence, but yet they can't forgive players for kneeling during national anthem. That's just something that I kind of don't understand.
I don't think that it's the fans that are going to be forgiving Kareem Hunt, though. I think that the big difference here between Colin Kaepernick and Kareem Hunt is that Kareem Hunt was not the face of the Kansas City Chiefs. He was not trying to start a movement. He's done something that several other players have done before. So we've seen Ray Rice in a domestic violence case. We've seen Greg Hardy in a domestic violence case. We've seen Michael Vick dogfighting case. People are sort of desensitized to this sort of thing. So this was obviously bad judgment by Kareem Hunt, and people don't view him favorably because of what he did. When you hear Kareem Hunt is signed to this team, you think, oh, geez, why would they do that? This is not a good move for them from a PR standpoint. But the difference between that and Colin Kaepernick is that Colin Kaepernick was so divisive among the country. When you look at Kareem Hunt, vast majority of people, I'm sure, say Kareem Hunt did something bad. Hopefully he gets whatever help he needs to never do this again. Colin Kaepernick, half the people in the world think that what he did was great, and half the people think that what he did was terrible. And that kind of divisiveness for the face of what would be your franchise is completely different than bringing on a guy that has some bad publicity tied with him. But that being said, when I heard that the Browns signed Kareem Hunt, my initial thought was, why would you ruin something that seemed to be going in an upward direction? Because now you do somewhat mar that team with somebody that was clearly on record committing domestic violence, which in today's day and age is one of the most heinous things you can do. You saw the reaction to the Ray Rice video, and this video wasn't a whole lot better. So you already had a team that was rising. You had a good running back in Nick Chubb, and you had another good running back in Duke Johnson that both had different purposes. And then you had a young quarterback in Baker Mayfield who has his own issues to work out too off the field, or at least had his own issues. I don't think bringing in this guy is going to be very beneficial, and he's probably not the kind of guy that you want hanging around the place where he grew up, where he knows a lot of people. You probably want him to sort of be away and to get in a new environment. And that's just my take on this. I think that this will probably hurt them more than it will actually help them. And I don't think it's going to lead to a more cohesive team, but probably actually a less cohesive team.
Yeah, that's the interesting side of it, because we saw what Cleveland did this year. They made huge strides forward, and a lot of people are actually picking this team to possibly win the division next year. Now, with this signing, there's a lot of question marks about what could possibly happen in the organization, which could possibly cause this team to. Hopefully that doesn't happen because I think America wants to see Cleveland actually do well in the NFL. But like I said, it's a bizarre signing. It's something that you look at a few years ago, you would say, oh, that's something Cleveland would do. But we saw this year they were changing a different direction. They could have easily held on to Josh Gordon, but they saw that there were still some issues with him. So what did they do? They got rid of him. They traded him. And now they sign a guy who's had a different sort of issues. It's just bizarre that we see them trending in the right direction, and then they fall back into something that they would have done 5 years ago when they weren't good. But that's just something, obviously, we'll be keeping our eyes on until, obviously, once the NFL comes to their decision on what will happen with Curry Puck. But we talked a little bit earlier about the situation of how this compares to Colin Kaepernick. And the reason why we mentioned that is because Eric Reid, the safety for the Carolina Panthers this past year, just re-signed with them a 3-year deal. It's approximately $22 million. And this is a huge win for Eric Reid. Had a fantastic season after signing midseason with the Panthers. And he basically said that this is proof that his coercion case against the NFL is valid. What are your thoughts? Is that a good move by Carolina? And then do you think that this is proof that there was something against him?
So the actual word for the case that he had was collusion against the NFL, which essentially means that all NFL owners were conspiring together to not hire him or Colin Kaepernick. So the fact that he got re-signed and had a good year, that's good for him. There was definitely an issue where what he did reflected in the fact that he didn't have a job. Here's the difference, though, is that people keep forgetting that this is a business, the NFL. So if Eric Reid protesting something that half of all NFL fans think is an important thing not to be protesting, then that's bad for business. It's essentially the same as hiring an employee that goes out and stands in front of your business yelling at shoppers, telling them not to come in. It's not necessarily collusion if every NFL team comes to the same conclusion on their own. The way that he would get proof of the NFL actually being involved in collusion would be him having to collect recordings or something of NFL owners actually getting together and discussing how they're collectively not going to sign Eric Reid, which I highly doubt happened. I think that what happened is that teams looked at him and decided they didn't want to touch somebody who was going to be controversial and who was going to polarize fans one way or the other. So the fact that he succeeded and is doing well, that's more power to him and more power to the Panthers for taking a risk on him. But he just needs to stop talking at this point, because all he's going to do is get himself in more trouble, because eventually he's going to be more problematic than he's worth for the Panthers. So he needs to just realize that collusion isn't the same as people just deciding they don't want you because you're a polarizing figure.
Now, looking at this, obviously, congrats to him, because he definitely deserves the deal after having a great season. But at this point, him mentioning all this isn't more about him. This is more about his friend Colin Kaepernick. Now, remember, Eric Reid was the first guy to kneel after Colin Kaepernick started this a few years ago. So basically, he's still continuing this in support of his friend, because he believes that his friend should be signed somewhere in the NFL. And you look at some of the teams this past season, you could easily make a case that I would have put Colin Kaepernick on one of these teams, even as a backup. I wouldn't say of the 32 teams he'd be a starter, but there are a lot of teams where he easily could have been a backup. You look at, for example, Jacksonville. They could have used a solid backup this year. They didn't really have anyone. Blake Bortles played bad. Cody Kessler was worse when he started. Look at Denver. They lost a bunch of quarterbacks because they either got injured, they had off-the-field issues, and like Case Keenum had an inconsistent year. So having a valuable backup could have helped that team. Look at Buffalo. They had multiple injuries this year, and I think he could have been a better fit than some of the guys that they ended up signing. And even look at Green Bay. You look at when Aaron Rodgers got injured, we saw what Deshaun Kaiser did when he got into the game. he's still learning, and he wasn't ready to play. We even saw that in the season finale. Having a backup like Kaepernick with some experience could have been better for that team. So this isn't more about Eric Reid. He got his money. He deserved it. This is more about him wanting to make a case for his friend, Colin Kaepernick, who he's saying that should have had an opportunity this year in the NFL. Not saying as a starter, but somewhere in the league. And I think that Eric Reid has a case in this point.
I don't think anybody would argue that there's people in the NFL playing quarterback right now who are less talented physically than Colin Kaepernick. However, it's still the issue that you don't want to sign this guy because of what it would do to your fan base. And that's something that Colin Kaepernick did to himself. And he needs to just come to terms with the fact that that's what Colin Kaepernick decided to do. This is what's happening because of that issue that he decided to bring into the forefront and the way that he decided to do it. So in reality, when you look at this situation, I don't think that people are smart anymore when they say, well, look at all these players that are worse than Colin Kaepernick, because the honest truth is that each owner looked individually at Colin Kaepernick and decided he was a bad investment at this point. And that's not collusion. That's just deciding that he's a bad investment. So I don't think Eric Reid has any sort of case. I think the fact that he has a contract now is actually less proof that collusion occurred. So I think that his whole case just went out the window, and he needs to just leave it alone and move on and focus on playing football.
Well, based off of this signing, do you think that this could increase Kaepernick's chances of getting signed somewhere?
I think that at this point, Colin Kaepernick's been out of the NFL around, I think, 3 years. I don't think anybody's interested in taking a chance on him anymore. And Colin Kaepernick hasn't even indicated that he wants to come back into the NFL. And he probably has so many endorsement deals from Nike now that he doesn't even have to work for a living ever again. So I'm sure he's perfectly content with what he's doing right now.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting take. Obviously, this is going to be something that's going to continue to talk about until we hear the conclusion of the case. But that should be quite some time before we actually do get to that conclusion. So let's move on from this topic. Let's look ahead. So next, let's talk about something. We had a couple of cuts this past week in the NFL. Most recently, we had the Houston Texans made it official that they are cutting wide receiver Demaryius Thomas. You look at he was traded there this past season from Denver, and then didn't really have too much production, and then later suffered a torn Achilles shortly after joining the team. Is this a good move for Houston?
It's hard to say. It doesn't feel like too long ago that Demaryius Thomas was one of the better receivers in the NFL. I still remember the Tim Tebow game where he ended up taking the ball all the way to the end zone to win in overtime in the wild card round of the AFC playoffs. But he was so incredibly unproductive with the Texans ever since they got him that it's hard to justify bringing him back when they have some other players such as QT that they want to take a better look at. So it's kind of sad for Houston that they traded for this guy. It would have been nice to try to trade him to some other team to get something in return, but they were not able to do that. So I guess it's a fine move. I didn't see a huge problem with it. It's a little bit surprising, but not totally surprising.
Yeah, I think the move makes sense because you look at when he tore his Achilles, it was later on in the year. So that means he's going to miss at least the beginning portion of the season. So say like 4 games are out. And then you look at the production they have on that team. Obviously, they have DeAndre Hopkins, one of the top receivers in the game. Will Fuller, when he's healthy, is one of the best slot receivers, without a doubt, in the league. Very explosive. And then we saw Keke Coutee had a very solid rookie season as well for them. So they have the pieces at receiver. And you look at Demaryius Thomas getting older, coming off a pretty significant injury. Achilles injury is very hard to come back from, at least to get back to full strength and get your full speed. So this move works out best for them. They're a younger team, and he's an older guy. It works out perfect.
And that wasn't the only player or set of players that got cut either that were somewhat notable. So if you go to the Atlanta Falcons, they cut ties with Robert Alford and Brooks Reed, and both of them later actually re-signed with the Arizona Cardinals. Do you think that this is a move that matters at all?
I think it's a funny move because you look at, obviously Atlanta's looking to cut some cap space. They signed Matt Ryan to a huge extension a little bit ago. They're going to have to do the same thing with Julio Jones soon, so they had to get rid of some money. You look at a couple of years ago, Robert Alford, one of my friends who always comments to me, talks about how he was one. I believe he even commented at us, Ryan Leisner from Michigan. He said that he was one dropped pick in the Super Bowl away from being the Super Bowl MVP and probably being getting paid as one of the top corners. So that one was a little bit surprising, but he had a down year this year. Injuries have been an issue for him, so it makes sense. Brooks Reed hasn't really put up too huge in numbers in the past years. Remember, they also did cut Matt Bryant, so they're cutting away some key pieces for that team, but that just means that they believe in the younger talent on that team. So I think that it's a good move financially. It's just funny that they both signed with the same team. Look at Arizona. They definitely needed to improve that defense, and they did that, signing a guy like Alford who can still be a solid corner for that team. And then Brooks Reed signs with them too. Could be a good signing if he's able to play up to what he did a few years ago. So I just thought it was funny how they both got cut within the same day, and then they both signed with the same team. I believe it was the same day as well.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. You almost wonder if they were like, we have to be together through all this. Like, they made a pact or something, or they told the Cardinals, like, if you sign him, you also have to sign me. I hope that's what happened. I'm going to just believe that's what happened no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, definitely could have happened. Cardinals definitely need to do something, and a couple of these signings were in the right direction for them. So if they're able to improve this year, definitely would be good signings. But let's switch topics. So let's move on to obviously
switch topics. Let's switch leagues.
Exactly. Let's move on to the big news from this past week, and that was the start of the Alliance of American Football. We had some exciting games this past week. We actually had we had a shutout in the first week. We saw the San Antonio Commanders beat the San Diego Fleet. All the home teams actually won their games. We saw the Atlanta Legends lose to the Orlando Apollos. We saw the Memphis Express get shut out by the Birmingham Iron. And then we saw the Arizona Hotshots, the team that's favored to win this year, have a dominant performance at home against the Salt Lake Stallions. Ryan, what's your initial reaction to week one, and what was something that impressed you and disappointed you?
Well, what impressed me the most was that the overall reception of this league was very positive. So even though the games weren't necessarily the closest or the most well played, people seemed refreshed by the fact that some players could, kind of get roughed up a little bit. There was a hit on a quarterback that jarred the helmet off that the flag wasn't thrown on. People just seemed like they did enjoy actually watching this pure form of football, even though it wasn't necessarily the best football that was played. So that's a big check mark for the AAF. We did see this, though, with the XFL and some other leagues where at first there's a lot of interest just because of the novelty of the new league. And then as time goes on, it sort of wanes and eventually just completely drops off. So we'll have to see if this league continues to be hot. The thing that I was least impressed with, how about this guy, Christian Hackenberg? I mean, we assume that he just didn't show up in the NFL because he didn't get an opportunity, but he was just terrible. He was on the only team that didn't score, the Memphis Express, and he completed 10 of 23 passes for just 87 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. Like, what happened to this guy? This guy was drafted into the NFL. How has he gotten so bad?
I don't know. He had a really good freshman year when he was at Penn State, and then that mechanics became an issue. I believe that was when Bill O'Brien left, so that could have been an issue for him as well. But yeah, that was definitely something that was very disappointing for the first week. You had mentioned that they had very good ratings. They had actually the highest ratings for prime time on Saturday, even beating out one of the highly anticipated games so far of the NBA season between the Thunder and the Rockets. So that's very good for them. Another high take I'll get that I got from this weekend, Trent Richardson. Now, he only had, I believe it was like 56 yards on 20-some carries, so not the best average, but he got 2 touchdowns. So I think this is something that can get his momentum going. He said he's enjoying football again. He's having fun, and that's something that he definitely needs. Another guy who I was impressed with was John Wolford, the quarterback from Arizona. The reason why I say that is because he wasn't even expected to be the starting quarterback for this team. Trevor Knight was the guy they drafted first in the quarterback draft. So the fact that this guy, who's originally out of Wake Forest, put up a dynamic game, threw for over 270 yards and 4 touchdowns, was very impressive for the team that is favored to win this year. And I want to talk about that hit that you talked about earlier on. From that was hit. The quarterback was Mike Berkovicki. The player that hit him, Sean Washington. You look at the play, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh, in the NFL, that would have been a flag." My initial reaction was, I'm not sure if that would have been the case. You look at, he didn't hit him at the helmet. He wrapped up. It was a clean hit. If anything, you could have called the fact that he might have landed on him going to the ground. Other than that, it was a vicious hit. But for the most part, it's kind of seemed like a clean hit. Don't you think?
I mean, regardless of the fact that it might have been a clean hit, it's a good look for the AAF, just the fact that the flag didn't come out. So they didn't err on the side of caution there, which it's kind of like going around the internet as one of the, I guess, one of the main reasons why people are saying that the AAF could have staying power. So it's sort of become an emblem for the league. Like, this one play happened, a flag didn't come out, the refs kept it in their pocket. Like, this is something better than the NFL. So even if it was an actual clean hit, which it does look like a clean hit, but it just the message that it sends was very positive for the AAF.
Yeah, and going on the things I thought were disappointing, I'll admit the game that was on CBS on Saturday, despite getting really high viewership, the game itself wasn't necessarily as impressive. You look at it was a game that featured only 1 touchdown, and there were some good defensive plays and some okay offensive plays, but it wasn't as exciting of a game as I was hoping for. Now, I wasn't of the games, I was expecting one of the games to actually be like this, but for it to be the game that the majority of America saw, I think was definitely a disappointing part by the AAF. Obviously, I think the reason why they they did the majority of the CBS on that one, the other one could have been in Orlando. Orlando had some bad weather, so a lot of the stuff that they wanted to do, they wanted to make sure that the weather was okay, so that's why they did an indoor stadium. And then I agree with you, Christian Hackenberg didn't play that well. He is getting another opportunity this week. Maybe he could be a quarterback that one of us picks. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'm kind of interested to see why Mike Singletary gave him another opportunity. But if he's able to excel this upcoming week, this week's game is a national televised game. It's the game. It'll be the one game, regular season game on TNT this year. If he's able to do well, this could be something that could put Christian Hackenberg in the right direction.
Yeah, you hope he gets pointed in the right direction, but it does feel like every time we hear about this guy, we just hear about how inept he is at throwing the football. So it's going to be an uphill battle for Christian Hackenberg from here on out.
Yeah, and based off of the viewership, we did have our question of the week kind of focus on what to expect. We had asked, are you going to be watching the AAF this upcoming season? The answer was either yes or no, obviously. Twitter was unanimous. Everyone said yes, they are excited to see more football. Facebook was split right down the middle between either yes, they were excited, or no, they just wanted the NFL. So this will be something we'll have to see over the next few weeks. Remember, when the XFL started, they had some really good ratings to start. Then they dropped drastically. Obviously, if you haven't watched the 30 for 30 on it, one of the games the second week had a little bit of a timing issue. So that's kind of why the viewership fell down from there. But I don't think this will be the case for you.
I don't think so either. It seems like they have a pretty good handle on things so far. It seems like it's being run fairly well. What I'm most excited to see is if it does have staying power, it would be really nice to get some expansion and have a team come to Milwaukee, actually.
Yeah, and you look at, they only have 8 teams right now. It would not surprise me if they expand this to 12 or 16 teams, depending on what happens. Because a lot of these players you're seeing either had struggles in the NFL or have had opportunities on like practice squads. And there are obviously a lot of practice squad players in the NFL. So a lot of those could get opportunities to actually get some game time. So it definitely has the opportunity to expand for sure.
Yeah. So do you want to go picks for this week, Ian?
Yeah, let's go with our picks before we get into our new game. So let's see. Looking at the matchups this week, I'll get that pulled up.
We have.
Our,
I can read them off for you. We have Salt
okay.
Lake at Birmingham, we have Arizona at Memphis, Orlando at San Antonio, and Atlanta at San Diego.
Okay. I'm gonna go with Birmingham at home. I think Trent Richardson does a solid job for them again. It's really tough to pick Memphis, so I'm gonna go with Arizona off their hot start. I'm gonna say San Diego wins at home, or San Antonio wins at home, and then San Diego wins at home. So I'm picking all the home teams except for Memphis.
Okay, I have Birmingham and Arizona, so I agree with you on the first two. But then I'm a big Orlando Apollos guy, so I'm going with the Apollos of Orlando for that game, and then I'm picking Atlanta in their matchup with San Diego.
Okay, yeah, definitely a good option. Orlando, I think, could be a very good team. Obviously, we saw them dominate their first game of the year, so I think that if they're able to keep it up with Steve Spurrier, then that team can be very good. So that's just something we'll have to keep an eye out for. Garrett Gilbert, the quarterback, put up solid numbers in his first week of action. So definitely keep an eye out for that team. They could be the one team that could pull a win over Arizona this year.
Yeah,
but,
based on the first week, too, it seems like whichever team had somewhat viable quarterback play was the team that would come out on top. So we'll have to see if the quarterbacks improve at all, if they get it figured out. I think that's the thing that could really make or break the league is how well the offenses actually are able to perform.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So we're going to play a new game here with the AAF. So obviously, fantasy football, we haven't really seen too much of leagues starting for the AAF with it being your first year league. And we didn't really know what to expect the first week, so that's why we didn't start last week. So what we're going to do each week during the regular season is we're going to pick a position for fantasy football. We're each going to pick one player, and then we're going to keep our track of our totals for the whole season, see who does the best fantasy football job with the AAF. So, Ryan, I'm going to let you go first. This week, we're going to pick one quarterback. So, who's the one quarterback that you're going to pick? Who's going to have the best fantasy day this week?
I'm really glad you let me go first because I'm going to pick the only quarterback that was actually productive, and that's Arizona Hotshots quarterback John Wolford, who you mentioned before. So he had 275 passing yards and 4 touchdowns, which was way better than any other quarterback did in the first week. So I'm going to go with him this week and expect the Arizona Hotshots to put up big numbers again.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping you weren't going to pick him, but definitely a good pick right there. I'm going to go with Luis Perez from Birmingham. Now, this was a guy who won a national title at Division II and was on the training camp roster for the Los Angeles Rams. And he kind of put up surprising numbers. Nobody really knew too much about him, and he played really well. And he was able to do that when the main story was about Trent Richardson. So I think that he has the opportunity to put up some big numbers at home. I think he does that this week.
I'm deeply surprised you didn't go with Garrett Gilbert from the Apollos. He threw and caught a touchdown pass in week 1.
And I'll be honest with you, he wasn't even my second choice. He was going to be my third choice.
Wow, ouch.
Do you want to know who my second choice is?
Sure.
I was going to pull a shocker and go with Christian Hackman.
That would have been a shocker. I wish that you did it. I'm not sure he's going to be starting.
Yeah, I just feel like for some reason he's going to bounce back and he's going to put up some really big numbers this week for some reason.
You know what? Put it on the record. We'll see how that goes.
We will do that. So, like I said, we'll do that weekly. We'll change the positions up and we'll see what happens. But let's go on to the next topic. And I'm not sure if you were able to do it, Ryan, but I was one of the ones that downloaded the new Alliance of American Football app. Were you able to check it out?
I wasn't able to check it out. No, I usually keep my phone running pretty lean also.
Okay.
But not get the app for it. How is it?
Well, I'll admit it's improving. So when I first got it, saw the opportunity of this was an option where if you don't have like cable or anything, I could watch the games. So there are some downsides to it. So obviously you can't watch every game on there. And CBS Sports Network in their contract made it so that on the app their games are not able to be streamed. So any of the games that are on CBS or CBS Sports Network cannot be streamed on the app. So I did get to watch some of the games on Sunday. I watched the majority of the Arizona and the Salt Lake game. That one I believe was on NFL Network. So I believe the ones that are on NFL Network and Bleacher Report Live should be streamed on the app. The issue is you don't get any commentary or anything on the app when those games are streamed. They just show the play-by-play of. So they show the game, is just no announcer. So if you're one of those people that like listening to music and not the announcers, this would be the app to use it for. And there's a cool feature in the app where you can be. It's basically kind of like a fantasy aspect. Kind of makes you want to be a predictor. So if you don't watch the live game, they have this feature where you can either guess what play is going to be called, what direction it's going to be going in, and then the result of the play. So it's an interesting aspect to the game, and then it shows you kind of in like a animated aspect of what the actual play is. So I played it for a little while. I got all the way up to level 7 on the weekend. So definitely something to try. I know on Saturday they had some issues where obviously they didn't have the live game since they were on CBS, but the picking or predictor wasn't working, so you couldn't really do any of that. It was fixed for Sunday, though. They did do an update late, so that caused a lot of issues. But overall, I'm actually kind of surprised with how the app works, and hopefully the app doesn't have any issues because I think it could be something that a lot of people are going to want to check out.
Huh. Yeah, it could get more people involved for sure if it's a solid app.
Yeah, definitely. And then also the aspect of if it has some of the games on there each week, then obviously that's going to get a lot more people to watch the league as well.
Yeah, most definitely.
But Ryan, we are getting towards the end of the show, which means it's that time to talk about fantasy football. And this week, we're going to talk about one of the main stories that we talked about earlier, and that's Antonio Brown. So depending on what happens with him, unlikely he stays in Pittsburgh, but if he does get traded, do you think he ends up losing any sort of fantasy value wherever he goes this year?
I think depending where he goes, he could actually gain fantasy value. So if he goes to a place where he is the absolute clear-cut number one target, he could actually be seeing more yards, more passes thrown his way, and more touchdowns than he did in Pittsburgh this year. Because you remember, there were times when Ben Roethlisberger would heavily target Juju Smith-Schuster. And that would kind of leave Antonio Brown with a little bit less in the stat department than we're used to seeing him. So if he gets to a team that has a somewhat viable quarterback and not a whole lot of other receivers, we could see a very big year for Antonio Brown, even bigger than what he had with the Steelers. But obviously it's very dependent on where he's traded to.
Yeah, I think it's definitely dependent on where he goes. But I think wherever he does end up going, I think he is going to have a down year this year. The reason why I say this is because this guy led the league in touchdowns. I believe he had 15 touchdowns this year, which was most in the league. He also had over 100 receptions again this year, which he's been doing for quite some time now. I just think wherever he's going to go, it's going to take a little while for him to adapt to whatever system he has to learn. So I think he'll still put up solid numbers. I still think he has the ability to get to 1,000 yards, maybe get over 100 yards or 100 receptions, but I think it's going to be hard for him to get to the numbers that he had this year. So obviously still probably is a first-round pick or so in fantasy, but I just think that if you're hoping he has the same production he had this year, remember he only played 15 games, then played that last week, I think he'll have a little bit of a downfall this year.
Yeah, I think he's also going to be trying to prove, though, that he's worth more than the Steelers were willing to give him. I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder where he goes somewhere new. But I really think, if he goes to the Jets, I don't think he's going to have a better year than with the Steelers. If he somehow ends up with the Packers, then maybe it just really depends.
Yeah, and you look at if he gets traded to a team that Pittsburgh does play at one point this year, for a fact he's going to be doing whatever he can to put up the best year of his career.
There have been trade rumors surrounding A.J. Green. How about an A.J. Green for Antonio Brown swap?
That would actually be, if you do a straight swap, that's something that could actually work out. You look at, they probably do some sort of draft pick swaps in there as well. But that would be something that's very intriguing. It's really tough to see them doing something that's within the division.
It seems too easy.
Yeah, that's it.
Two receivers that are actually probably similar caliber that are both disgruntled with their current teams in the AFC North.
And also, I mean, I've also heard reports that Cleveland could be a team, but I just don't know if that would be a good move at all.
I mean, really, any team in the AFC North seems like it could be a decent fit. Even Baltimore has been looking for a really solid number one receiver.
Yeah, I think any of those teams could fit. Like I said, the only issue with it being in the same division, obviously Pittsburgh's looking to improve in that division, and you trade away Antonio Brown, you're going to be not improving in any sorts. Even if you do get a guy like A.J. Green back, remember he had an injury-prone year this past year, so I think either way, if they trade in the division, they're going to lose.
Well, it's sort of like the Anthony Davis thing is, do the Pelicans trade to the Lakers, who could possibly give them the most back for that deal, and risk having Anthony Davis then in the same conference? It's sort of the same with Antonio Brown. Is if the Bengals or the Browns or the Ravens were to offer a very good package for compensation for trading Brown, then would it be more beneficial to take that deal, or would it be more beneficial to ship him somewhere where he's less of a factor in the playoffs? That's the question. We could even ask that as a question on Twitter, possibly, but that's sort of something that's worth looking into.
Yeah, that's definitely something, and I think that's something that can and probably will be one of our questions over the next couple of weeks. But with that, that does bring us to the end of this week's show. So before we do end the show, what are your final thoughts, Ryan?
Final thoughts are, thanks for listening as always. It's great to be part of Brew Sports and supported by people that listen to the podcast as much as possible. We look forward to bringing in some more guests in the future, so watch out for that. And even though football season is technically over, we are very excited to talk about all of the goings-on that I'm sure will be very interesting going forward.
Yep. Again, thank you everyone who listened this week to our episode of Touchdown Tuesdays. Again, we are the official football podcast of Brew Sports. Make sure to listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. Or if you do want to listen to us live each week, check us out on YouTube each day that we record. Also, if you haven't yet, make sure to follow us on our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter. If you do search us on Twitter, make sure to use the handle at TDW or TDWN2's podcast. Keep an eye out for our question of the week. That'll be posted on both Facebook and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, check out Brew Sports Basketball Podcast, Run It Back. The guys over there, Eric and Sam, give us the details on the NBA each week. Definitely give them a check. And then keep an eye out for possible future other podcasts to come out of Brew Sports as well. Again, thank you for listening this week. We look forward to giving you the news in the NFL and the AAF next week.
Go Apollos.